Hello and welcome to episode 10, the last episode of this series. The topic of the last episode will be unit testing. So we want to see how we can write some unit tests for our components. There are other playlists on the channel about testing or unit testing, the components in other technologies like, for example, React. So if you're not, familiar with the concept of unit testing, again, there are playlists that you can watch. But in this episode, which is, as I said, the last episode of this series, we're going to talk specifically about testing the components, the bookcard component specifically. So let's get started. So we are going to test our components. We are going to use vtest, and we are going to use OpenWC testing, which is like a utility library, a testing utility library specifically for web components. And by now we know that using lit, we have developed our web components. And now it's time to write some tests for them. So the first thing to do is to install some packages, some required packages. And I am going to talk about these packages that we need as well. So as you can see, we are going to install vtest, we are going to install OpenWC testing and HappyDOM. Let me go ahead, test these, install these, and then we are going to, talk about each one of them. So this is the, application that I have running, and I am going to, install the dependencies on this new branch, episode 10. So now let me go ahead and install, talk about these, packages. So the first one is vtest. Vtest is like, a unit testing framework. It is very fast. It enables writing and running tests with modern syntax, like, for example, describe, it, expect. We're going to see them in action. It supports features like, for example, test coverage and snapshot testing, watch mode. These are the topics that we're not going to talk about in this episode because, this course is not about vtest per se. And then it works seamlessly with web component testing, which is something that we want to do. It integrates well with browsers or DOM emulators like HappyDOM. We're going to install HappyDOM as well. We have already done so, right? HappyDOM. It's our, DOM emulator. We're going to talk about it. The next thing that I want to talk about is OpenWC testing. Again, this is like a helper/testing utility library for testing web components. It has features like feature, one event, expect, which we will see. These are some of the extensions that you can use when you're testing your web components. And you can, take advantage of the features that OpenWC testing provides, like, for example, mounting custom elements, querying shadow DOM, testing events, and so on. It works well with lit, with, web components and other libraries that are used to create web components because it can abstract away the DOM and the, boilerplate, setup that you're required to do for DOM. Now, the HappyDOM, the last thing that we installed is HappyDOM. HappyDOM is like a DOM emulator. It is very lightweight and fast. It is, designed for testing environments. It kind of simulates a browser-like environment, very similar to JS DOM, and it allows your components to interact with DOM or run in Node.js. It provides headless DOM manipulation. It is going to make it absolutely, easy and useful to test web components, especially in frameworks like lit. It is very memory efficient, more memory efficient than JS DOM, I would say. And it has a simpler, browser API, and it has, let's say, less complete browser API compared to JS DOM, but it will, do the trick in our case. Now, HappyDOM is more often than not used alongside vtest when you want to test your, web components, and you do not want the full overhead of JS DOM, and this makes it the perfect choice for us. The next thing that we need to do is to create this vit config ts file. We're gonna create this vit config .ts. We're gonna put this code inside of the file, So by looking at the code, you can understand different things, right? For example, you can see that I am setting my environment to happy DOM instead of something like JS DOM. And I am importing the, describe, and it's using these globals true, and this means that I do not need to, import them again and again. And I am, including this path for my, tests. So my tests are going to be located in this path. So let's go ahead, create vite-config.ts. So I'm going to create this vite-config.ts, config, right? Okay. Now let me go ahead. I'm going to close out this guy. And what I want to do is to write the code for my vite-config. And we're done with this. Now let me go ahead and talk about it a little bit. So we are using define config. This is a helper function from Vitess to define and type check the test configuration object, and we are ensuring that our config file has the correct shape and helps with the IDE auto completion. And the test object contains the settings specific to running our tests. I'm talking about this object. I told you about the globals, the environment, and the path to my test files. So these are some of the configuration that you can apply on the for example test object. So globals true. I told you that it allows you to make these describe it expect available automatically in your test file without you require to importing them. Environment happy DOM. We are using this DOM, let's say emulator. It's, as I said, a light emulator for DOM that provides some APIs so that you can run your tests outside of your browser. And we are, specifying the path to our test files. So our test files are going to be discovered using this path, and they're going to be, executed. They're going to be run, and then we're going to see the result. Now let's go ahead and create this file. So we're going to create a folder called test, and this book card, test.ts. Let me copy this, and then here, next to the src folder, I'm going to create this test folder, and I'm going to create this file inside of it, and then I am going to, create 5 tests for the book card component, and then I am going to talk about them one by one. I'm going to import book card component. This is the first test. Now the second test. The name suggests the role, of the test, renders with provided attributes. So suppose I set some attributes on the book card component, and I want to know if the component correctly renders these pieces of content. The next test renders bestseller badge when bestseller is true. The next test does not render badge when bestseller is false. So we're unit testing specifically the book card component, but again, you can take the same approach. You can clone the repository, take the same approach, and write tests for the book list and book details components as well. We are testing the event as well, the book selected event that was emitted using the book card, by the book card component as well, and was handled by the book list component. So this is it. I'm gonna save the file, right? And let's go ahead and talk about the different tests. As I said, we've got 5 tests. I want to talk about them one by one. So the first part is the basic test setup. We are importing some stuff, as you can see here. We are importing describe, it, and expect. These are provided by by Vitess for organizing and asserting your test. We are using fixture because we want to mount the components onto Happy DOM, the DOM emulator that we already discussed. We're using one event. This waits for a single event to fire and an element. When we want to test our custom events, this is going to be helpful. And we're importing the bookcard component, which is of course the component which we want to test. Now let's take a look at the first test. So if you're not already familiar with Vitess, I will probably I don't know, create a playlist for Vitess specifically, but this course is not about Vitess. So we're not gonna have a deep dive into the concepts of Vitess. So I'm gonna walk you through the most important things. So this is the first test, right? So this is the name of the test, renders with default values, right? And then as you can see here, I am mounting this bookcard component onto my DOM emulator using this fixture. So this means that the element is now that instance of the bookcard component. So we are testing the bookcard component because we want to test whether this component mounts correctly onto the DOM emulator by the using the default configuration. So as you can see here, I haven't passed any attributes or properties. And then now that we've captured the this instance of our bookcard component inside of this EL variable, we can do some stuff on it. For example, we can query the elements that this web component is supposed to render. So based on the component that we've got, based on the bookcard component, we know that we need to have an H3 and a P element in there. So we are going to query the shadow root of the element using the query selector, and we're going to capture these inside of our H3 and PS variables. And then we can do expect on them to kind of assert the content of these elements. For example, the H3 text content has to be untitled book based on the default behavior of the bookcard component. And then there's going to be more than one paragraph, right? So the first paragraph has to contain unknown author, and the next one the NA. Again, to kind of refresh your memory, I can show you the bookcard component. So this is the bookcard component. Let's take a look at the template. We know that the bookcard component is going to render an H3, right? Where'd it go? So the bookcard component is supposed to render an H3 with the title, a P paragraph, a P element for the author, another P element for the year, right? And the default values for these props, as you can see here, are untitled book, unknown author, and I guess for the year it was also an A, right? Let me take a look here. Yeah, it was an A. So if we do not pass any year for the bookcard, it is going to render an A. So this is the first test. This is the first test that I told you about. So it is testing the component, the bookcard component, and it is testing, it is verifying basically whether the component is going to render correctly if it doesn't receive any props. Now the next test, all of these tests, by the way, are inside of our describe block. So describe is like a container for your related tests. It's like, let's say, a test collection, if you will, right? And then you've got these it blocks for different tests that you want to have. The next test is this one. Take a look at the name, renders with provided attributes. So in this case, again, I'm repeating the same pattern. I'm creating an instance of the bookcard component, but this time I am passing the attributes, year, title, and author. And then again, I am querying these elements, and I am verifying the correct content, inside of the h3 tag and the 2 paragraph tags that are rendered by this component. So this kind of verifies that the component is going to render the content correctly if it receives some attributes. So the 3 attributes: title, author, and year. This is the next test. Renders bestseller badge when bestseller is true. This is one of the behaviors of the book card component again. So the bestseller, if you take a look here, this is the bestseller tag, right? So again, if you take a look here, if the bestseller is true, we are going to render an additional div element with the class badge, and we're gonna, put bestseller in there. So let's take a look at the test. It is again creating an instance of the book card component, assigning this bestseller attribute to this instance of the book card component, and then it is querying the component for an element with this class. So we are doing query selector. This is the CSS selector that we're using. So we are going to find an element with the class badge. And again, the component is going to render this div element with this class, right? And then it is doing that assertion using expect. It expects that badge element to exist. And then it expects the content of that badge element to be bestseller. This is another, aspect of the behavior that we expect to see from the book card component. The next one, this is the next test. Does not render badge when bestseller is false. Again, if we create an instance of the book card component without adding that, bestseller in there, right? We expect that badge element to be absent. So we are expecting that to not exist on the component. And the next test is this one. So this one, this is about the event. Do you remember there was this custom event in the book card component? Do you remember the book card component? When the user clicks a div element for that book card, we're gonna send this, custom event. I'm sorry. This is the custom event I'm talking about. This is something I guess we implemented in episode 4 or 5. I'm not sure. The name of this custom event is book selected, and this custom event is going to get picked up by the parent component, which is the book list. So the book selected custom event. Now, the test is this: emits book selected event on click with correct details. We are creating another instance of the book card component. As you can see here, we're, for example, adding bestseller. We're passing values for title, author, year, and then we are creating an event listener using the one event that we imported above. So we are passing the web component, the element. This is the variable we created here. This is a reference to our web component, and then the name of the custom event, which in this case is book selected. So the next thing that we do here is like a simulation of dispatching that event. So this is the shadow root of our element. We are querying an element with this class card, which is, of course, if you take a look at the template again, this is the div element. So we are getting that element, that card element, and we're dispatching an event called click with bubbles true and compose true. And we know that when on the div element we have the event called click invoked, we're gonna kind of call the onClick event handler. So we are kind of, as I said, simulating the dispatching of that event, of that click event on that root element, the div with the card class. Now we are going to await the listener that we have. We're going to capture the event inside of this variable, and then we are going to do some assertions on our event. For example, we expect the event to exist. We expect the detail of that event to be this. Do you remember in the book card component when this onClick was kind of dispatched? What we did was to create this custom event, And then for the detail, we are passing the values of the title, author, year, and bestseller properties. Now here, this book card component with this value for the title, author, year, and bestseller is going to invoke that book selected event. So we expect the detail of that event to have this title, this author, this value for the year, and bestseller to true. So these are the values that we have set here for this instance of the book card component. So these are the 5 tests that we've got for the book card component. I have explained everything here. So, I mean, you can, of course, pause the video and go through these descriptions. But I have also explained everything to you in Visual Studio Code. So these are the, different tests that we have. So 5 different tests. 4 of them have to do with the content. The last one has to do with the event. Now we can run our tests using npx vtest. So let me go ahead and run npx vtest. And as you can see, we have 1 test file, 5 different tests, and all of them passed. And of course, yeah, this is the way to do this. This is the way to do the unit testing part. Now, the recap for this episode. In this episode, we learned how to write unit tests for one of the, components that we've got, the book card component. Again, as I have told you before, there's nothing stopping you from creating other unit tests or even integration tests for the other components in this application. Now, let's wrap up this course. Again, I want to, say a big thank you for all of the, people who have watched this series from the first episode up to the last episode. That really means a lot to me because, preparing these videos takes a lot of time. The fact that you watch them and, share them or put a comment in there if you've got anything to say really keeps me motivated. So that is the first thing that I want to do. I want to, say a big thank you to the viewers. The next thing that I want to invite you to do is to subscribe to the channel, A Coder's Journey, for more tutorials. If you enjoyed watching this series, please make sure you give it a like, you share it with your circle of friends. That, of course, will help the channel immensely because more people will, watch the playlist, will discover this playlist. And if you want to learn more about software development, don't forget to check out the other playlists on the channel. These days, I'm focused on, front-end and back-end development. For back-end, I'm mostly using Microsoft, technologies like, for example, C#, Visual Studio, EF Core, Web APIs, and so on. For front-end, I'm using JavaScript libraries and tools like, for example, Angular, React, Lit, Vue, and of course, Blazor, which is, again, something that I really enjoy working with. And databases, and of course, I am also working on, Python for AI development, machine learning, and so on. So if you're interested in these different topics, make sure you subscribe to the channel and, explore the playlists as well. And that was it. I really appreciate you spending the time to watch the series from the beginning to the end. And I hope to see you soon in the next series. Take care and happy coding.